Thanks all for joining us. I know we are all busy with classes and teaching and the many, many responsibilities you have as a graduate professional student here, and we want to use our time as preciously as possible here. So thank you again for joining us. I see we're at 2:02, so you know what? I'm going to go ahead and get started. We got a good amount of information. So welcome everybody, in case you're wondering where you are. You are at the Town Hall sponsored by Academic Senate and the Division of Graduate Education and Postdoctoral Affairs, or we call it GEPA. And we're here to provide information on the finances, some of the federal actions, of course, answer your questions. And so that is our goal for the next approximate hour. So next slide, please. Just a quick note here, we are recording, and then towards the end we will stop recording when it's time for questions. If folks feel uncomfortable with questions that are being recorded, of course, we will pause it towards the end here, and it will be posted and made available afterwards. Next slide, please. As mentioned, maybe I didn't mention, my name is Judy Kim. I'm the Dean of the Division of Grad Education and Postdoctoral Affairs. We have many other panelists joining us. As I did mention, this is a sponsored, sort of a joint town hall with GEPA as well as the Academic Senate. And so I want to invite Rebecca Jo Plant if she'd like to say a few words here, as well as maybe just mention the other folks from Senate who are here. I hope Rebecca can, let's see. As Rebecca is getting ready, I wonder if, Sarah, if you would like to say a few words, Sarah Gilly, Professor Gilly, who is the chair of Graduate Council, or I saw Åsa Gustafsson is also here. And I'm just inviting any of our Academic Senate colleagues if you'd like to say a few words.
Hello there. Sorry, I was in the waiting room, somehow left behind. So I'm just really happy to be here. The idea for this town hall is to bring graduate students more into the conversation that I think faculty, staff, and administrators have been having on our campus for all year, and arguably even before that, about the UC and UCSD budget and the rather sobering outlook that we're facing in the years ahead. We've been having similar town halls for faculty, just based on the conviction that the more our community can have access to clear, accurate information, the more we're able to sort of see the big picture and think creatively as a community about how to weather these challenges. And as graduate students, you are just such an essential, critical part of our institution. At Academic Council, that's the system-wide version of our Senate Council, the main vehicle for the faculty to have a voice on campus. At Academic Council, the central concern I hear from faculty, and that is echoed on our campus as well, is how can we maintain our R1 mission of training the next generation of researchers and scholars. And for professors, I think I speak for others on this call that having graduate students, it's just so central to who we are, what we do, how we envision ourselves. And it's frankly the part of the job that many of us enjoy most is mentoring our graduate students. So it's been really difficult for those who rely on grants to fund graduate students. There are now constant discussions about possible alternative funding strategies. And for departments like mine, I'm a historian, there's also a lot of concern, and this is more broadly, not just among the humanities, about shrinking cohort size, wanting to provide our graduate students with, a rich experience because in graduate school, your peers matter just as much as your advisors in terms of the educational and especially the social experience you have. So these are challenging times. We're in it together. We want to, share the kinds of um, uh, difficult news that we are hearing with you, and really just have an open, honest conversation about where we're at and how we can move forward together. So, again, happy to be here.
Thank you very much. I don't have much to add to that. I think you've summed up very wonderfully, really the goal of this presentation, this town hall. And actually, we can go to the next slide, which really outlines our purpose. And you've already heard from Chair Plant, this was an idea because we wanted to make sure graduate and professional students have the same information that has been shared with faculty, with staff, and really our entire UC San Diego community. We're going to go from top down in terms of even looking at the University of California finances, sort of putting that in context of the graduate and professional programs that we have. We want to talk about the impact of some of the federal actions, including financial aid, changes to international student policy, and of course reinforce what Chair Plant has already said, our mission, our collective efforts to support all our graduate and professional students here at UC San Diego. And then we received some of your questions ahead of time. We have those at the end. Please feel free to pose questions into the chat, and we're happy to answer as we move along. So next slide, please. And the folks who are here providing information are actually experts in the areas. So GEPA and Academic Senate, you've heard from us. We also have Graduate Council, which is the arm of Academic Senate that focuses entirely on graduate education and graduate and professional students. We have experts from Financial Aid and Scholarship Office, Government and Community Relations, as well as International Services and Engagement Office. So when you ask questions, certainly, hopefully we have the experts to be able to answer your questions. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with overview of university finances. And throughout the town hall, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of hand off as we approach different topics. And I'm going to ask the panelists just to really briefly introduce yourselves so that our audience knows who you are. So overview of university finances. Let's go to the next slide. And I'll pass this over to our Associate Dean, Thad Kauser.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thad Kauser. I'm the Associate Dean. What that means is that I support Judy in supporting all of you. I want to start with the big picture of the UC overall, University of California. And what this graph shows is that over the last 10 years, UC has been in an expansion mode. Right. It's increased spending to over $11 billion. And that in every year has outpaced what inflation would lead to. So we've moved beyond the baseline that you would expect over that time period, and everything that's the core spending. So what core spending at the UC is everything we think is really core to our mission, right? It's the research that you all do with us, it's student scholarships, and it's instruction. So it doesn't include things like the medical center, housing and dining services. It's the central mission of the university. And the reason it's grown so fast is because we're in the people business, right? University's 75% of this spending is on employee compensation, including graduate and student employees such as TAs and GSRs. And the two reasons it's grown is because UC now hires more people and pays each of those employees more. Next slide, please. If you look at the short-term outlook, we're going to continue to see an increase in the two main sources of funding that support core funding. So in this graph, we see in the blue line, general funds, that's the tax dollars from the people of California that support the UC core mission. That's about 43% of the money. And then 52% of the money comes from tuition, paid by undergraduate students, by professional students, paid through extramural grants, and some graduate students individually. That's 52% of the money. Next year, each of these will rise. Tuition and fees are expected to go up by 4.5%. The governor have proposed a 7% increase in state funding. We'll learn in about a month what the final budget resolution is. But the state of California and the students who attend UC are continuing to increase that investment. It's just that costs are rising even more quickly than that. Back to you, Judy.
Great. Thank you. Next slide. we want to show here is now looking at the UC San Diego finances. So that just told us about the University of California, its relationship to state funds. Here's what's going on our campus. So you see three columns of the fiscal year 25, which is this academic year actual, so that's last year. The middle one is how much we're projected to spend or receive in revenue this year, and then the forecast for next year. And you see the broken down, revenue sources. We have tuition and fees. We have from the state of California, that just mentioned that, non-resident tuition and fees, contracts and grants. So these could be federal, these could be from all sources, other miscellaneous. And so what we've done is what's been done here now is showing is the total revenue is simply the sum of all of those. So we see what it is. It's a 1.89 billion for last year, 1.92 for this year, 2 billion for next year. What's our expenditures? Because of course that's what we need to compare it to. And now you see the expenditures and then the net difference between the expenditures and revenues is what's given below. Last year there was a $10 million surplus. This year projected to have about an $8 million deficit. The forecast next year is about a $37 million deficit. Over on the right side, you see some notes, which are called the change drivers, which basically is, you can think of that also as some assumptions. We're assuming a certain number in terms of enrollment and cohort rates, basically flat, and that leads to the forecast for fiscal year 27. Here's that 7% increase that you just heard about. We're assuming that we're going to get the 7% increase from the governor. Even with that 7% increase from the governor, we're going to have a projection of a $37 million deficit next year. If the governor says, you know what, or if it's been decided that it's not going to be 7%, it's a 0% increase, so the funds from the state are flat, then the deficit will be much larger, on the order of 70 million. Because of this forecast, this deficit, all the units on campus have faced budget cuts this year, and we are modeling further cuts next year. If you hear from programs and your graduate coordinators or anybody's staff that there are some budget challenges, you can see that this is kind of, this is a foundation for the budget challenges, is that we are predicted to be in deficit next year. Next slide. And what we want to do is we just want to provide a really big overview of, how does that funding, you see the revenue and the expenditures for campus. And now we have here is a matrix that shows how are graduate students funded, if at all. There's of course a very large number of students self-funded, so self-supporting programs, many of our master's programs. The first column after that is, is there a salary or stipend associated with it? Who pays the resident tuition and fees? Who pays a non-resident supplemental tuition? Self-funded, of course, is paid by the student. If you are an employee as a TA and you have a greater than 25% employment, of course, as an employee, there's a salary. As a benefit of the employment, the tuition and fees, state tuition and fees are covered. And then the NRST is, it sort of depends on the degree type and the funding language. For example, PhD students who have past candidacy have a 3-year waiver for this NRST. So who pays that non-residential portion depends on really the kind of the program you're in and your specific situation. You can also be employed as a graduate student researcher. So, let's just say that it's funding from an advisor's grant. This is very common, NIH, NSF. Obviously, there's a salary associated with that. Again, as a benefit of employment, that grant covers the tuition and fees. And also the NRST is also typically covered from the grants. And so we wrote this generically as UC San Diego. UC San Diego in this table could be anything. It could be PI's grant, TA funds, something called block grant, gifts, etc. If you're on a fellowship, it could be that from your home country, there's a fellowship. Really, all of these answers depend on the awards. So we just wanted to simplify and provide the landscape here and also to illustrate that there is quite a bit of support coming from UC San Diego. So when there is that budget issue, obviously these types of, we need to look at all the areas where the spending is going to be impacted. Next slide, please.
Great.
I'm going to pass this over to Thad.
Great. So now let's look at what the numbers are behind each of these spending categories. And if you look at the three main areas that UC San Diego provides support to graduate students through, that's providing money through what's called the block grant, flexible funds given to each program to meet whatever the unmet needs of graduate students are. TA tuition and fee remission. That means if you're employed as a TA, this covers your tuition and fees, and then the actual salary that you get that you've earned from that TA work. The money towards that has increased by about $26 million over the last 5 years. So it's gone up in large chunks in all of those, and this shows really the increasing investment that UCSD has made in graduate education over the last 5 years. Next slide, please. At the same time, for every graduate student supporting that tuition, because of many important and good reasons, that those salaries have gone up, so those costs are increased, and so this just shows you what that 9-month salary of an entry level TA position is, and how much it's grown over the last 5 years. So then if you take that money that UCSD allocates that has grown in recent years, but each of those positions is more costly, what the next slide will show you is how many TA positions this funds to go to graduate students. So this is sort of essentially the number of graduate students across all departments in the universities who can be supported based on the salary growth, but also the investment growth. And what that shows is that it's rose for a little while, then went down, but we really the funding, even though there's been that increase in investment, it hasn't funded any more slots. In fact, funds slightly fewer slots than we had every 5 years ago, and that's contributed to many programs admitting a smaller cohort this coming fall, so that they can ensure that they can support the students that they have now as well as in the future. And then the last slide I'll show you also shows that for the graduate student researchers who are most often funded by extramural support, by grants from foundations, that those salaries have risen as well. The 12-month salary, which is more typical appointment for a GSR at 0.4, has risen significantly over the past 5 years. And in a time when there's fewer extramural grants, that also means that there are fewer positions to go around. And that's been part of why you're going to see smaller cohorts in this entering fall.
Great, thank you for that, Thad. We're going to move on to another topic here, which is about just general research funding. And I'd like to invite Carl Welliver, our colleague here, to tell us a little bit about the status of research funding and including at UC San Diego. So next slide, please, and I'll pass that over to.
Thank you, Judy, and good to be with you all. As Judy mentioned, I'm Carl Welliver, Associate Director for Federal Relations. I'm one of the folks based in Washington, D.C. I'm also an alum of the undergraduate program at UC San Diego, and so very grateful for all the opportunities that are presented out here in Washington for our folks that come up through those pathways. So I want to share some good news, and I'm going to gloss over these slides just to be able to share some of the additional information and breaking news that we've got out here in Washington. As you may have already heard and seen in the news, we are seeing a smaller number of grant terminations compared to earlier in the year, and are seeing quite a few grants restored through court orders at varying levels and processes throughout the system. We've seen successful lawsuits from constituencies within the University of California system, as well as across the landscape of higher education in the country, which is great news. Obviously, we would have preferred that none of those grants be terminated in the first place. But where it comes to administration priorities and canceling grants, we are seeing those rebuffed in many different places. When it comes to the overall federal appropriations package and the appropriations process, federal funding generally, what we are seeing and what we saw in the fiscal year 2026 package that was just approved a couple of months back, I think most people were tracking the partial government shutdown. The exceptions to that shutdown meant in those funding levels that were provided in those funding packages were nominal decreases in funding for our key funding agencies at the research side, and in fact, generally across the federal funding landscape. What that means, and we'll get to it on the next slide later, is that the actual effective cuts were closer to 1.6 to 5% for our many significant programs. I'm not saying that that is a good thing, but compared to the cuts that were expected, that is a significant reduction in the cuts and the pain that we would have seen and felt across the research agencies and our campus. When it comes to indirect cost recovery or facilities and administrative costs, which are a big buzzword out here and included on the revenue side of our accounting metrics for overhead costs associated with grants, but they are the auxiliary costs of doing research. They're essential. They're reimbursements for funding that we've already expended. To be able to do that research on our campus, there was a proposal to cut that indirect cost recovery rate down to 15% across the board. That would have had significant fiscal impact for the university. We are still operating with a concern that the administration will make an attempt to reduce those costs further. But over the past 2 fiscal years, there's been prohibitive language that Congress affirmatively included to prevent those reductions, which is great news for us. I'll also note that our Vice Chancellor for Research, Corinne Piquesa, is in Washington right now with her colleagues across the UC system to advocate for both a continuation of that prohibition of a reduction, but also for a solution that actually resolves some of the issues that Congress has raised on this issue that relate around transparency. And we go into immense detail about how intensely audited we are to make sure that those funds are actually going to the things that they are supposed to be going to. So just noting that there's a number of different methods and processes in play to prevent those cuts from being realized on campus, which, if they did happen, would translate down across the graduate space, our research space, and all the way up through the system-wide budget accounting metrics. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. And as I mentioned, while the fiscal year 2026 funding was actually a nominal reduction, a very small reduction overall, we have seen that some federal agencies have not been able to get that appropriated funding out the door. The Office of Management and Budget at the White House has delayed approval of agency spending plans, put footnotes in their appropriations list that show where the funding should go and how it should get there. And we are challenging those in court. I say we, I mean the entire higher education space. These are programs that range from C-Campus, a childcare program that we've benefited from in the past, as well as everything under the sun at NSF, HHS, NIH. So obviously, any kind of attempt, an effective attempt to slow down that funding is going to have an impact as we move forward into the fiscal year. Obviously, a reduction in NOFOs at agencies is going to present fewer opportunities to apply for funding. What we did hear from John Lorsch just yesterday in an all-day presentation, he's basically the director of extramural grants at NIH, is that any grant that was said to be approved that hasn't seen funding yet, even if it's 2 years into that active grant period, that's to be expected. And that is something that every institution across the country is going to see because of the federal government shutdown, as well as the staffing shortages that exist at the agencies. They were fully cognizant of the impact that that has on both the workforce on our campuses, the budgetary implications, as well as what it means for indirect cost recovery. They are working as quickly as possible. They've assured us to make sure those funding amounts get out the door, that the grants get funded, and that they are committed to getting all of the funding that was appropriated for fiscal year 26 out the door before end of fiscal year, which is September 30th in the federal side. So that does sort of address some of those questions around why the funding isn't actually flowing, even though the NIH grants have been approved and are active. We'll move on to the next slide, please. For fiscal year 27, which is the appropriations process that's ongoing right now, the president's budget request, which starts the fiscal year appropriations process, indicated severe cuts once again to federal science agencies and other agencies that support the work that we do here. We'll note that those reductions were actually smaller than the ones that were proposed in the fiscal year 26 proposal. So that's a common theme here. And so we expect that some of those funding levels will continue to remain at a level that at least tracks with fiscal year 26. What we have noticed from the fiscal year 27 process is that appropriators and members of Congress have gotten the message from institutions both in their districts and across the country, what those reductions have meant, both in real terms and what they could mean in the future. We are seeing appropriators from both sides of the aisle when presented with opportunities to reduce the funding levels in their budget in their appropriations packages that are being considered right now, they are rejecting those proposals to reduce those funding levels further, and in fact are speaking in quite generous terms about what research does, both for the country, but countering some of the narrative that we've heard and seen about what research actually means. And so that's been really helpful. All of that said, obviously proposals to eliminate entire directorates at NSF, entire agencies and entities that are federal, like NEH and NEA, IMLS, all of that's a huge detriment. What we are seeing, though, even in the funding packages that are being prepared right now, is that those cuts are being rejected. NEA, NEH all received funding in the appropriations packages that were released and are now being voted up, marked up in committee. So they're still in process. A lot can change. But this is in the House, which is where we would expect the largest cuts to be presented. The Senate has tempered a lot of what we've seen in the House, and we should expect to see that moving forward as well. Congress did reject those kinds of severe cuts in proposals in fiscal year 26. We would expect to see the same for fiscal year 27, though, as I'm sure you can imagine, everything in Washington can change at a moment's notice. I will make one side note. As we mentioned with the spending plans being held up, there are many things that agencies can do to slow down funding that goes out the door, whether that's through DOGE and reductions in staffing, or through just administrative changes in how programs are run that can severely limit who is eligible for them and who's eligible for those opportunities, including universities like our own. So again, we're keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening in Washington. A lot can change, and we'll continue to track it and provide those updates as we have them. And with the next slide, I think I will hand the mic back to Judy.
Great. Thanks very much, Carl, for that update. We wanted to have one slide that's specific to graduate and professional students. And really, it's a slide just to be aware. Keep a lookout for possible changes to federal fellowships that are specific for graduate education. And we just jotted a few of these here. NSF, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, GRFP, really huge one, very wonderful. We've had great success with it on our campus, but there were some unexpected changes to this program announced pretty late. Changes in eligibility, i.e. could second years apply, they couldn't. Reduced window for applications, a number of awards varied. The NIH pre-doc applications as well, they were modified, the format. So if you're relying on, previous templates as you prepare, you may want to just be aware of this. The NDSEG from Department of Defense. So far, we haven't noted any major changes, but again, we need to keep a lookout. Unfortunately, some fellowships and programs were canceled. So here's one of them here. The DDRA was canceled for 25-26. We don't know the future of the funding. So we wanted to just bring to your attention some of the fellowships that we know were impacted and affect graduate students. Next slide. With that, we want to stay on the theme of federal action, but move over to financial aid. And for that, I'd like to re-invite Carl, as well as invite Sylvia Marquez to present these slides. So next slide.
Thank you so much again, Judy. So just a brief overview. In last July, the president signed into law the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, also known as OBBBA, HR 1, all of these things. It changed a lot about the education landscape. It provided a lot of changes to the taxation landscape in the country. The things that we want to focus on most here are how these changes have impacted both the rulemaking process as well as the federal funding landscape for graduate students specifically. So just to provide a brief overview of what that process looks like now and what it may mean in the future. So Congress and the Department of Education are looking to end programs at the department. They have committed to closing down the Department of Education in aggregate and sending functions that are essential over to other agencies, to include the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and even the Department of Justice, as well as Treasury for student loans. I think all of us would argue that the Department of Education is better suited to administer each of these programs for any number of a million different reasons. And the stated policy goals here are a little bit different from what the actual realized policy impact will be. The actual impact will be that fewer students will have fewer opportunities and fewer ways to finance those opportunities, and fewer ways to actually graduate and do the things that they came to higher education to do. Um, I, I'm more than happy to answer any specific questions about this, but I do want to turn the mic over to Sylvia to share more about what these impacts mean for students on the ground. And then I wanted to share one note on the rulemaking on accreditation and these student loans, just to say that the department is moving forward at a very regular pace with implementing these changes. They are aligning at a very difficult time. And now we're getting notice that the accreditation rulemaking process, which would have severe and significant changes for programs of study across the graduate landscape, all of that is coming to a head, and we're getting updates very quickly, fast and furious, with little information about why the decisions are made and what the impacts will actually ultimately be. So all of this threads together. But with that, I'll actually hand the mic over to you, Sylvia. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. I'm Sylvia Marquez. I'm the Executive Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships here at UC San Diego. If we could go to the next slide. I think what Carl said just now is very, very important, because the changes that are highlighted here about loans, and this gives you a good outline of what is changing. It's also very important to note that in a typical year, these changes would not be implemented in the same year that they were approved. Typically, they would have been pushed out a year, but that is not the case with the rules from One Big Beautiful Bill. So this chart is just a good outline of what is changing. I just want to highlight a couple of things here before we get to the next slide. First is direct unsubsidized loan limits now differentiate between graduate and professional students, and I'll define that for you in a moment. Grad Plus loans are eliminated. They're not eliminated across the board, and we'll talk a little bit about who they're eliminated for, where those exceptions lie. But that's important, especially for our incoming students or who are entering into new programs, that Graduate Plus loans are no longer an option. There are new lifetime aggregates for student loans borrowed, and this is across the board from undergraduate to graduate. So that is a huge shift for our students. The other thing that's very important here as well is the less than full-time enrollment is now something that we as an aid office are required to monitor for students. So if you're not enrolled full-time, we are then required to reduce the amount of loan or calculate the amount of loan that you would be eligible for if you're not at full-time in a particular term. And so that is something brand new, manual work that we have to take on in order to comply with this new regulation. And the last one here, we don't have any institutionally determined limits. So those are the few things. I want to talk a little bit more, if we could go to the next slide, about the Grad Plus loan elimination, because I think this is really important for this population of students. There are exceptions to this. So it's not, if you've borrowed a loan previously, there could be an exception where you are allowed to continue to borrow a Graduate Plus loan, but they are very specific about who qualifies for what they're calling a limited exception or a legacy borrower. And so students that have borrowed previously a federal loan, so an unsubsidized loan, if you're in the same program, if you haven't taken any time off, if you're still within the published length of the program, if that's 2 years, if that's 3 years, as long as you're still within that, and you're enrolled prior to June 30, and you've had a loan dispersed, you should be eligible for this exception. And what that means is that you could continue to borrow Graduate Plus loans, and you would be under the old loan limit. So you're not restricted to the professional versus graduate student limits or the aggregate limits. And so there's a distinction there. The Department of Education is going to be identifying who is considered for this limited exception, not the aid office. And my understanding, we are still waiting for sub-regulatory guidance at this late stage, even though it goes into effect in July. But our understanding is that the Department of Education will make that determination, and they are making those determinations based on students who have borrowed a federal loan in the 25-26 academic year. So if you borrowed before in the same program, but maybe didn't borrow this year, they're not going to identify you immediately. That's something that we would have to work through with them on a student by student basis. So it's going to be challenging administratively for us. We can identify our students, but so we'll be doing a lot of that work over the next month or two so that we are prepared for the fall term. Um, and then I think it's just important to know that if you don't meet these requirements or you are here longer than the published length of your program, for example, you are by default no longer eligible for the limited exception. And once that limited exception is broken, you are then subject to those new loan limits that were on the previous slide. And that potentially could mean no more Graduate Plus. So it's just really important to know what those differences are. We have a page on our website that does speak to this, and we'll make sure to make that available. Can we go to the next slide? So the definition of who is a professional student versus a graduate student, that was also defined as part of OB3. And so what we're seeing here is what the Department of Education has defined as a professional student. And these are the folks that would have the higher loan limits in terms of their overall borrowing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Judy.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl and Sylvia, for that great update on the financial aid for students. We now wanted to spend a few slides discussing some challenges for international students and particular topics. I'm going to invite Gabi Hoffman to join us, please.
Thank you so much, Judy. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabi Hoffman. I'm the Senior Director for the International Services and Engagement Office. And I'm going to talk through some regulatory changes that are coming down the pipeline that will impact both our current students and new students starting this coming year. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So I know for many of those on this webinar, you are aware this has been a turbulent couple of years, 18 months. Since January of 2025, there have been a lot of proposed rules, proclamations, different regulatory changes that have impacted our international students as well as scholars. I would say the most consequential one that is coming down the pipeline is the proposed rule for the potential termination of duration of status. So I'm going to get in a little bit to the details of what this means. I am aware that many students know what this is already. We are fielding questions, understandably, in our office about this, but I'm hoping I can pull apart some of the details here from what we know and what we are expecting. So in August of 2025, the Department of Homeland Security announced the proposed rule to establish what is called a fixed time period of admission on F1 students and J1 students and scholars entry into the United States. Currently, and I'll go into this in more depth in the next slide, students and scholars in F or J1 status are given the ability to be in the United States for the duration of their entire academic program, however long that is deemed necessary by their department, by their institution. But the Department of Homeland Security wants to change this to a fixed time period of 4 years maximum for every student type. So whether you are a master's student or a graduate student, of course, knowing our doctoral students needing more time normally than 4 years, of course, this has the biggest impact. This impacts the extension procedure for those who do need to extend their documents. The extension process does still exist, but it is going to be significantly changed from what currently exists. I do want to stress that we don't know what the final rule is going to look like quite yet. We have been waiting since August when the rule was proposed, poring over all of the details, as I know institutions across the United States have been, to figure out how to implement some of these changes, but we don't know what will be final until the final rule is published. That date has kept getting pushed out, and right now the latest is that by June 1, early June, a final rule will be announced, but the implementation will not occur until 60 days after that time period. So August 1st is when this rule would become effective, would be published in the Federal Register, and then we would be able to provide more specific guidance. So I just want to make that clear to folks first. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So some key points of this proposed new rule. As I mentioned, the first is moving from duration of status, which students and scholars have enjoyed for the last 35, 40 years, to a fixed time period of up to 4 years maximum in the US to finish their degree objectives. The extension, if a student does need an extension, that is still possible. The current process for extending your documents, some of those of you here who might have already experienced this, is quite simple. It is coming to our office, requesting the extension, of course, with the backing of your department and reasoning for that academic extension. We will approve it and extend your documents normally within 15 business days. The new process involves sending a formal application to the federal government, to USCIS. It involves a fee that USCIS charges of about $470. And we don't know at this stage how long that wait time would be for your extension to be adjudicated. So it could be a few months or longer based on our experience with petitions that are sent to USCIS. They are taking at least 6 to 8 months. So we can only imagine if this is going to be increasing, that this will take longer. So some other pieces I want to go over that are included in this proposed rule. One is proposing restrictions on changes to educational objectives. So for students who want to transfer to another school during their degree program, this will not be allowed at all for graduate students. And if you want to change your educational objective at all, change your program of study, this will not be allowed either for graduate students. The expectation would be that that student would have to depart the United States, apply for a new visa for the different program, and re-enter the United States if that continuation were to be expected. Now, I want to talk a little bit here about transition period. As I mentioned, there is a 60-day grace period from when this final rule is eventually released. Once the rule goes into effect, there is some transition, some level of transition for those particularly planning on applying for post degree completion OPT, optional practical training. There is a 6-month transition period where you do not have to apply for an extension of your documents in addition to your OPT application. It will follow current process where you submit your normal OPT application. That's only for 6 months. After that, students applying for OPT will need to submit not only their OPT application, but an extension of their status for another $470. For current students, our current understanding is that their status will be converted to a fixed end date, but we have no idea at this point how that process will look or how DHS or SCDP will implement this. So these are all pieces that we will learn in time and then communicate through webinars, newsletters, and other communication to our population. Just some final reminders here that this is a proposed rule. It's not been confirmed, but once it is announced, we will immediately begin reviewing everything, work with our legal partners and our good partners on campus to work through certain processes that need to be implemented, communicate to all of you what changes are coming and how you need to prepare. And we are also, the Office of the President is monitoring this issue very closely and are also making preparations to offer guidance to all of the UC campuses when the rule is issued. All right. I think that's my time. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Gabi, for that update on duration of status. Very important. So we'll keep our eyes out open for it and hope for the best here. The last portion here, and then we'll move to Q&A, is just, what are some of the efforts that are going on our campus, sort of maybe with the other UCs, just reminding you of some resources. And I want to say that advocacy for graduate education on our campus at the UC level has been very strong. We've had some really very successful work groups, and these are work groups where it's a big group of faculty, staff, students in this case are really talking about many different topics. In 2024, we had it was a Senate admin work group on the future of graduate education. This was focusing on doctoral and MFA programs. There were many recommendations that came from that in terms of finances, in terms of clarification of academic progress, etc. Following this work group, there was now what's called an implementation work group. That is, the goal is to implement the recommendations from the 2024 team. And so the 2025, it's still ongoing. And really, it's again looking in great detail, getting updated numbers about the finances, how much funding, what are the challenges, to really make recommendations for our campus. And these work groups did include graduate student representatives. Next slide, please. Beyond UC San Diego, of course, there's University of California Office of the President, also has work groups. These are now across all 10 campuses. There was one, 23 to 25 called UC Academic Planning Council, Future of Doctoral Programs at UC. And much like what I just described here, was really looking at graduate education, making some recommendations on doctoral programs specifically. Very recently, there was a UC Academic Task Force on UC Adaptations to Disruptions. We call this UCAD. And this was really focusing on many of the federal challenges that we faced early last year, just some of the funding being halted immediately, very little notice. And how are we as a UC system going to respond to these disruptions? Following this 2025 work group, there's a current one, and it's called UCAD Plus. It's like a follow-up to UCAD, and now this includes actually has a specific subgroup, Future of Graduate Education, focusing on doctoral and MFA programs, and it's looking at all the recommendations from these other work groups as well. So these are ongoing. Well, this one is currently ongoing, and there's a lot of discussion on the recommendations that will be coming out of this work group. Next slide. Beyond the sort of state and federal levels, you heard from Carl and all the work that the UC system is doing in Washington, as well as, obviously effort in Sacramento. Whenever we have the opportunity, we are doing whatever we can to advocate for graduate and professional students. Grad Slam, for those who are familiar with it, wonderful event. It's UC-wide. In April, we had one finalist from every campus. We happened to be in Sacramento, and so with the deans, all the finalists visited state lawmakers, and really just to say, hey, I'm a graduate student, I'm a professional student, and let me tell you why the work that we're doing is important. So this is really any opportunity we have. Similar type of thing when we went to DC, the UC graduate deans met with Senate and House lawmakers. There's a very active government relations teams, both here on campus as well as Office of the President, actively engaged. You heard about some of these efforts. How do you define a professional program? There was so much feedback coming in from the UC system, the impact of determination of duration of status, which you just heard about. So a lot of the concerns are being heard on our campus, UC-wide, and being communicated as to the best of our ability. And, there's a broader concern about, are we losing trust in higher education? There have been reports about this. I don't know if you have seen some of these. And this includes graduate education, obviously undergraduate and graduate education. So we're really having discussions at the latest meeting that I was at with graduate deans. This was one of the topics that we discussed. What are the issues and how do we address these topics? So ongoing efforts to advocate for graduate education. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass this over to Susan Laughlin. We're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the funding and other aspects that are happening on our campus. So, Susan?
Hi, my name is Susan Laughlin. I'm the Director of Graduate Financial Support, and I just have a couple slides to talk about some funding opportunities for students. We're continuing to simplify our fellowship process and expand our opportunities. We're shifting towards application process to increase access to everyone. Our campus has also provided additional support for NIH training grants. Programs may seek support for PhD and MFA students with financial need. We've developed an academic continuity fund this past year that we've already used on quite a few students that are in need. So if you have a need, please feel free to reach out to your department for more information on that fund. And GEPA is always helping facilitate cohort planning with departments and programs and school leadership to make sure that the cohort sizes don't outpace the resources of the program. Next slide, please. If you have not visited, which you probably have, we do have our instructional assistant positions all posted in our TA marketplace. The link is provided below on this slide, and all of the TA campaigns are posted there every term, and so you can see which positions are available that would interest you. Next slide. We also have other employment opportunities in the program called Handshake, and so you can check that out to see if there's other employment opportunities that you might be interested in as well. And I am passing it on to Rachel.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Lapidus. I'm the Assistant Dean for Student Affairs here in GEPA. And a lot of what we've heard about may be weighing kind of heavily on you. You should also know that a lot of what we've talked about is federal, it's national, it's not unique to UC San Diego. It's circumstances that we're all responding to together collectively in higher ed and graduate education. And yet we have supports specifically for our students here at UC San Diego. So you've already heard from our colleague, Gabi Hoffman over at International Services and Engagement Office, ISEO. They're available to support students and scholars, in fact, with financial resources, with job opportunities that are specific to international student populations through Interstride. We have our own programs here in GEPA through our OAR Squared Outreach Access Recruitment and Retention Office that try to bring students together and build community. So it doesn't have to all be doom and gloom. There are still ways that we can be here for each other. You also have a graduate and professional student government, your graduate and professional student association. And one thing that they offer that you may or may not be aware of is they have travel grants that you can apply for. And I happen to see among our attendees some of our leadership from that program with us today. And we have our career center that provides some opportunities for you when you're preparing for your next steps, just preparing for your career journey, whatever that may look like after graduate school. And of course, we have services that care for yourself as a whole person, right? Counseling and psychological services, not just one-on-one counseling, but also groups geared specifically towards graduate students. And we have our student health services, and in particular, the app that was designed by students for students called Willow, which helps make it simple to navigate the care landscape across UC San Diego in the palm of your hand. And then we have online peer support. We, of course, have our wonderful campus community centers, spaces for affinity. And we have specific supports for students with dependents. That could be children, that can be other adult dependents. These include resources, family-friendly campus spaces, and coming up in just a couple of weeks, our graduation celebration. And then finally, for anyone who has any additional needs in terms of food security, housing security, and financial literacy and supports, our Basic Needs Hub is a great resource. And they also have an outpost in graduate and family housing of the Triton Food Pantry. So just want to remind you of some of the other things you have access to as a graduate student to help you stay supported and connected. And I'll pass it back over to our dean.
Great, thank you. We're going to get to the Q&A, the questions you submitted, but before that, slide before that, big picture. Thank you, Rachel. You've already said it very clearly. The issues we face, the majority of many of the things we've talked about, it is not unique to UC San Diego. Other universities face very similar situations, and sometimes more difficult. The financial situation for us, I think, is certainly not nearly as dire as many other institutions that we are hearing about. So despite these challenges, we are strongly committed to your success. We're committed to the success of our programs. Next slide, please. And actually, go ahead. Yes, all three of them. One more. And I just, put some of these examples here. These were just ones that came up off the top of our head quickly. We can always look at our rankings. You could pick any ranking you want. UC San Diego is going to be up there. We've got some wonderful jumps. The SCAG school is number 6 in the nation. That was a tremendously large jump. Arts and Humanities, Jacob School. So, the conversation never ends when we're talking about how well we are doing in many of our programs in terms of rankings. We have some wonderful opportunities that are sponsored by donors, by other governments, providing funding for students as well as opportunities. And then, of course, just if you look at how many awards that our students are earning that you all are able to secure, that's also very impressive. And so I just want to highlight, we are fully committed to the success. Yes, many challenges, but at the end of the day, you finishing your degree, moving on to the next stage of the career, that remains our top priority in anything that we do. So with that, I think we're ready to move over to Q&A. So next slide, please. Q&A time here. And what we have is we have questions that you all have submitted, and folks are going to respond to them. So we'll go through these. Some of them will be very quick. So if we can go to the next slide. And then first one. All right. First question that was submitted. What is the future of hiring teaching assistants like? Can departments lower the number of admitted students when there is clearly less support available? And the answer to this is we engage, as mentioned by Susan, in what's called cohort planning. So absolutely, your programs have conversations with the school deans and the leadership to say, hey, what is our funding looking like next year, maybe 2 years? Should we adjust the number of students that we can give offers to because we want to support the students who are here currently? And that absolutely takes place every fall. We have this conversation. Next. The next question, why do PhD students that have already finished their class requirements still pay tuition? And I'm going to pass it over to Thad.
Yeah, great. That's a fair question. And the reason that the University of California system as a whole requires this of all their campuses is that doctoral education doesn't begin and end in your 2-year coursework, right? You're always working with a mentor, either in their lab, learning new skills, writing and getting their feedback on that writing as well with all of your other advisors. And so for that reason, tuition continues. The kind of silver lining is almost all the time that tuition is paid by a different source, either an extramural fund or actually most often by the University of California. And so it's cycled back into the system and goes back into student support. But we recognize that it's a totally reasonable question.
Next question, please. Parking situation with EVs when ready, will there be more parking for non-EV B permit holders? I'm going to pass that over to Rachel.
Thanks for the question. So I checked in with our parking office, and they're sharing that our construction for EV spaces is largely complete, and the final station activations will be occurring over the summer. And at that point, parking will be reallocated to better balance the supply and demand for the different kinds of permit types to incorporate the EV-related changes and the other movement with our opening of various buildings on campus, right, over the summer. So one thing that you can expect is that there will be new B parking, about 250 spots, where the contractors currently are near the Triton Center construction, and that most of those spaces will be net new B spaces. So hopefully some alleviation coming in the next 3 to 6 months.
Great. Next question. I would like to request that grad reps support joint doctoral program students in accessing the perks associated with UCSD grad students, housing and healthcare. And let me pass that one over also to Rachel.
Yeah, I was a little unsure what grad reps meant here. Maybe that's your GPSA rep, which is always a good person to work with since that's your student government. I do want to share, in case it's not already well known, that JDP, our joint doctoral program students, they are eligible for UC San Diego graduate housing as long as you're maintaining full-time status, full-time enrollment across your 2 campuses. And when a student in a JDP is registered at UCSD and paying registration fees at UCSD, then you're eligible for UC SHIP or UC Raft options. And any JDP student, irrespective of registration, can use student health on our campus at UC San Diego on a fee-for-service basis, irrespective of where fees are paid. But of course, students that use our clinic will pay at the time of service. There is an option to get a detailed, itemized bill so that you can receive reimbursement from wherever your health plan might be.
Great, thanks. Next question. Is OPT still an option for students graduating in math education with their PhD? I'll pass that over to Gabi.
Yes, as far as we are aware, I have not heard anything specifically about OPT not being an option for graduate students at any level, regardless of program of study. Just as mentioned earlier, there might be some additional extensions that have to occur and additional fees after the final rule is released, 6 months after the final rule is made final. So that's the only thing that we're aware of.
Thank you. And the last question is also for you, Gabi. So next, how does the new duration of status rules affect current international students? How does it change coming out of the country?
Yeah, this is a really good question and something we're hoping to get more clarity on when the final rule is released. The rule as it stands is not extremely clear in the sort of implementation pieces. So our understanding, based on the current interpretation of the proposed rule, is that current students will be affected, meaning that their end date that they have right now on their I-20 will be truncated, will be shortened to 4 years. However, we don't know what that is going to look like, whether that's going to be shortened in our SEVIS system electronically, whether that means when that student travels and re-enters, that's when it's truncated on their entry record into the United States. We don't know what that will look like yet, but we do understand that it will affect current students. If you do travel, and this is going to be so important moving forward for international students, you need to be aware of your entry record coming into the United States, making sure you understand your new end date on your I-94 when you come into the US, because that will determine your stay in the United States.
Okay, I know it is now 2 minutes past 3, and we have gone through the questions that were submitted. And so with that, I do want to conclude our town hall.